Let justice roll down like waters, and righteousness like a mighty stream. Justice in a too often unjust world. For Reverend Jesse Jackson, each day was a new opportunity to bring justice in a too often unjust world. His ambition, the North Star of his advocacy, was to shape a world where justice is not an anomaly but a constant, where fairness and equity and dignity are so ubiquitous in our lives, they simply flow amidst us like water. Reverend Jackson was at once a mighty roaring river, able to create movements and galvanize masses with his words and his passion, and a gentle brook, able to provide guidance and comfort to the beleaguered and the bereaved. He could lift up and connect with an audience of millions with the same intimacy and fervor that he could with an audience of one. He inspired us not just in his conviction, but in his joy. Not just in his righteous anger at injustice, but in his boundless love for communion. Not just in his words, but in his deeds. He kept hope alive. Now, I find it somewhat difficult to memorialize a man whose presence always loomed so large among us. You can still feel his presence in this room with us here at the House of Hope. You can still feel his presence in so many ways. Every day he would honor us in the way that today we honor him. And you could feel his spirit in the movements for justice that have grown from the seeds that he tilled. Now, to the world, Jesse Jackson was an ambassador of hope for the oppressed who met with kings and queens and presidents and dictators and clergy of all the great religions. But here in Chicago, he was our neighbor. He was our friend. We were so proud. We are so proud. Here, his message of hope was one he offered in a friendly smile to the child playing in front of their home, or the tap on the shoulder for the young man looking for just a little bit of encouragement. He taught us to expand our ambitions and dare to imagine a better world, and to be kind and decent to one another. He brought enormous pride to the people of this city and this state. And on a more personal note, it has been an honor that my relatively short time in public office overlapped with Reverend Jackson's long tenure. And let me assure all of those who are here today that even as his body started to fail him, the Reverend's mind remained sharp. He never failed to pull me aside at an event to ask about something in the news or offer a word of advice or encouragement. He was politically connected. He knew. He shared an affliction common to all those in this room. He loved the political game all the way to the end. And while we know that we shared him with the whole world, Reverend Jackson belonged to Chicago. and Chicago belonged to him. He was ours and we were his. I am somebody. That wasn't just a slogan, it was his credo. It was Jesse's blessing on each of us, on all of us. A pronouncement of pride and accomplishment, pride and determination. It was his reminder of the incredible power that each of us has to lift ourselves up. The gift of dignity in our personhood that God had bestowed upon us. The power that each of us wields that can change the world. I am somebody. To his beloved wife, Jackie. To his loving children, Santita and Jesse Jr., Jonathan, Yusuf, Ashley, Jacqueline, and the entire family. MK and I and our whole family grieve with you in your loss. While Reverend Jackson meant so much to the world, you were the world to him. We will forever be grateful for your sacrifice in sharing him with the rest of us. To honor his legacy, let today be a new beginning, not an ending. Let's follow in his footsteps and be trailblazers and not just pathfinders. Let's bring justice to a too often unjust world until it rolls down like water and righteousness like a mighty stream. May Jesse Jackson's memory be a blessing to us all.
Thank you for that introduction, and good morning, everyone. It is truly my honor to be here today as mayor of the city of Chicago to celebrate a man who was my dear friend, a mentor, and a source of inspiration, Reverend Jesse Lewis Jackson Sr. And thank you to Mother Jackson, the entire Jackson family, for the grace and the courage that you all exude. And Mother Jackson, we don't mourn and grieve as the world because we are not ignorant to what has happened. And you will see him again. That's not a promise from a politician, but from the word. And he said, if it weren't true, I would not have told you so. Now, to the Jackson family, I'm not trying to start any trouble, but I looked at the program and I didn't see any West Side representation. I didn't see nobody from the Church of God in Christ on the program. So I know I represent the city of Chicago, but God bless you, Bishop Shears. I guess they wanted us to get out on time, so they. But on behalf of my wife and my entire family, I say thank you for the care that you have shown us. From one first family to another, we love you. By evidence in this audience, the city of Chicago, the state of Illinois, and the world, the country, agrees. One quick story. Reverend Jackson may have been the most competitive individual that I've ever met. So a few years ago, we were wrapping up a meeting on the west side of Chicago at Reverend Johnny Miller's church. And Zeke, we started talking about football. And at the time, Lamar Jackson was on his way to becoming the MVP of the National Football League. And I looked at Reverend and I said, now there's a Jackson that's really making a name for himself. And you know, Reverend did not like that. And he looked at me and he said, you know, I played that position. And he said, you know, I was better than Lamar Jackson. Zeke, true story. He said, he might be taller, faster, and stronger, but I'm better than him. And I said, Reverend, well, that doesn't leave too many more categories to determine greatness. And I said, in all seriousness, what makes you better? He said, because of my instincts. See, in sports, you hear about how athletes have a good feel for the game, something innate that can't be coached, that allows them to read the field and make split-second decisions that ultimately position their team to win. The Reverend will be remembered certainly as an incredible oratory champion, but to the people in Chicago, we knew him as a brilliant strategist, a master negotiator, an organizing savant. His instincts. See, he didn't shy away from the painful realities of racism and hatred, but he had a God-given ability to bring people in, to encourage them in, and to enlist them into the fight of our collective liberation. It was his instincts that understood that labor and faith were one and the same, as Dr. King prophesied. It was his instincts to stand up against school closures and the shuttering of mental health clinics. It was his instincts that led protests down Michigan Avenue when a boy's life was taken by a police officer and then government decided to cover it up. It was his instincts. It was his instincts to run in '84 and '88, but not in '92, to make way for somebody in the Deep South and a brother on the South Side to become president of these United States. It was his instincts. See, I had the privilege to accompany Reverend to Selma one year, and while we were there, he recounted the days and weeks that were spent organizing to get folks to walk with them across the Edmund Pettus Bridge. And he said, now that history has proven us to be right, he said that everybody and their mama was on that bridge. But he knew the struggle from going town to town, and he was calling people out of isolation and into community, understanding that the bridge is a symbol that burdens all of us. It's what connected us. It's what was waiting for us on the other side. He had a feel. His instincts understood that that bridge was a representation of the cross. See, it was the bull counters of the world and state-sanctioned violence that they unleashed on our people. It was a cross brought to bear by the most egregious alignment that can materialize in a fight against inequality. Reverend Jackson's instincts understood the words of James Baldwin, who said that ignorance and power allied is the most ferocious enemy of justice. But his instincts understood that if there's a cross to bear, we need a symbol of a promise. And that's when he formed the Rainbow Coalition that said that whosoever will, let them come. It would be necessary for the movement to build the future that he saw, where America could finally live up to her ideals. And when I think of Selma and that storied march across the Edmund Pettus Bridge, I know that Reverend Jackson knew exactly how much wickedness and hatred waited for them on that bridge. Beaten, abused, intimidated, they marched anyway. They bore the cross because they understood that on the other side of the bridge, his instinct said there's a win. And see, in America, we find ourselves at a bridge, and we are confronted in this moment. And that bridge is now described as borders, where borders get to determine how human dignity is determined by which side of the border you live on. He understood the bridge. And so now we are in the midst of a choice to choose hope over despair, light over darkness, love over hate, because he knew there was too much to gain on the other side of the bridge. Bishop shared, I think I feel my help coming. Because on the other side of the bridge, Rodney, housing as a human right. On the other side of the bridge, health care for all. On the other side of the bridge, safe and affordable cities. Accessible transportation, finally fully funding our public education system. It is time to cross the bridge, you all, to build an economy that works for all. Black, brown, white, Asian, young, old. It is time for the ultra-rich to pay their fair share in taxes on the other side of the bridge. Reverend, you cross your bridge. We know our assignment. We see you on the other side. God bless you.
It's good to be home. I love you back. The book of Isaiah Where are you at? Now, see, I believe in the Constitution. The book of Isaiah God is looking for a messenger to guide a hardened and resistant people. And the Lord asks, whom shall I send? And who will go with us? To which Isaiah replies, here I am, Lord. Send me. To Mother Jackson and the Jackson family, to President and Mrs. Biden, President and Secretary Clinton, Vice President Harris, Pastor Dates, my old friend, though he looking good, Reverend Meeks, Reverend Jenkins. It is an honor to join you today to celebrate the Reverend Jesse Lewis Jackson, a man who, when the poor and the dispossessed needed a champion, and a country needed healing, stepped forward again and again and again and said, send me. Reverend Jackson's immense gifts were apparent at an early age, even if his circumstances conspired to try to hold him back. Born out of wedlock to a teenage mom, growing up under the oppressive cloud of segregation, confined to schools, sports facilities, movie theaters that were separate and unequal. It was a world where on Thanksgiving he'd have to wait for his mother to come home on the bus carrying leftovers from the dinner she had to cook for somebody else. A world designed to tell a child that he or she could only go so far. That to think otherwise would be foolish or dangerous. And that wisdom required you to accept your lot in life. And young Jesse refused to accept that verdict. He was a born leader, an athlete, a talker, knew how to talk, star quarterback, student body president. He could have succeeded within the confines that were determined for him and had a successful life. But like so many of his generation, so many extraordinary civil rights leaders in the late 50s and 60s, that Joshua generation, he instinctively understood that individual success meant nothing unless everybody was free. So he became inspired by the bus boycotts in Montgomery. He led 7 black students into the whites-only library, sitting down and getting arrested for reading. Think about that. The library closed, but then it reopened. And when it did, it was open to everyone. "Send me," Jesse said, even as a young man, and the world got a little bit better. By the time Reverend Jackson graduated from college, he had attended Chicago Theological Seminary. He knew the nature of his calling, and he became, as everybody knows, the youngest member of SCLC, assigned to lead Operation Breadbasket here in Chicago, right around the time that Isaiah Thomas is talking about. And it was during this period, and especially after Dr. King's death, when the optimism of the early movement had begun to fade and leadership had begun to fracture, and when the country seemed to have grown bored, gotten weary of the idea of justice and equality, and moved on to other concerns, that Reverend Jackson rose above despair and kept that righteous flame alive. Through Operation Push, he led boycotts and challenged corporate policies around hiring and contracting, recognizing that civil rights without economic justice was an empty promise. He backed unions in their organizing efforts and activists in fair wage campaigns, understanding that if the have-nots and the have-little bits ever learned to make common cause across racial lines instead of fighting each other over breadcrumbs, everybody would benefit. He helped register millions of voters. He fought against biases in the criminal justice system. He drew attention to local abuses of power and called folks at the national level to account. And by the early 80s, he was delivering that message of change and hope across the globe, freeing hostages from captivity, fighting to end apartheid in South Africa. And then, in 1984, as the powers that be in Washington were rolling back hard-won progress, slashing the social safety net, when more and more folks were getting left behind, and greed was being trumpeted as a virtue. See, we've been there before. He stepped forward once again and said, "Send me." He ran for the presidency of the United States of America. I had just graduated from college during that first campaign. And I was living in New York at the time. I was working to pay off my student loans, eating a lot of tuna fish and camel soup. And if I went to a diner, I'd grab some extra crackers, put them in my pocket. And I was inspired by the civil rights movement, and I had in my mind to work for social justice, but even though I was full of good intentions, I was uncertain of how to serve and fighting off self-doubt. And I remember how, at the time, plenty of people, including, plenty of black folks, were dismissing Jesse's chances, suggesting, oh, he just wants attention, he can only get black votes. But then I remember one night sitting in my janky apartment, and I got an old black and white TV with the rabbit ears, and I'm kind of jiggering around, and it's about this big. I know young people can't imagine, but the TV was about this big. And I'm watching the Democratic primary debate between him and Walter Mondale and Gary Hart. And I remember how when that debate was over, I turned off that TV and I thought the same thing that I know a lot of people thought that night, even if they didn't want to admit it. That in his ideas, in his platform, in his analysis, in his intelligence, in his insight, Jesse hadn't just held his own. He had owned that stage. He wasn't an intruder. He wasn't a pretender. He belonged on that stage. And the message he sent to a 22-year-old child of a single mother with a funny name, an outsider, was that maybe there wasn't any place, any room where we didn't belong. And that message of fairness and dignity, of justice and hope, that's what the Rainbow Coalition was all about. In 1984, and then again in 1988, Jesse didn't just speak to black folks. He spoke to white folks and Latinos and Asian Americans and the first Americans. He spoke to family farmers and environmentalists. He spoke to gay rights activists when nobody was talking to gay rights activists, and blue-collar workers. And he gave them the same message, that they mattered, that their voices and their votes counted. He invited them to believe. He invited us to believe in our own power to change America for the better. By the delegate count, Jesse's two candidacies ultimately came up short. But he paved the road for so many others to follow. Doug Wilder became the first elected black governor. Carol Moseley Braun went to the U.S. Senate. Because of Jesse, the Democratic Party changed its rules, ending the winner-take-all distribution of delegates during presidential primaries, which meant underdogs and outsiders like Bill Clinton or Bernie Sanders could stay competitive and build momentum instead of getting knocked out early. And it was because of that path that he had laid, because of his courage, his audacity, that 2 decades later, a young black senator from Chicago's South Side would even be taken seriously as a candidate for the presidential nomination. I still credit that first run of Jesse's and Harold Washington's campaign for drawing me to Chicago. And I didn't know anybody when I first arrived. And I was working as a community organizer, as it so happens, in neighborhoods right around here. Roseland, Woodlawn, Alt Gill, West Pullman. And I'm meeting these young preachers like Meeks and some crazy priest named Flager. And And I guess Jenkins was running around, but he's kind of young. He came a little bit later, so I'm going to churches and I'm listening to all these amazing preachers, and it was hard work, and half the time I didn't know what I was doing, and progress was slow, and I definitely didn't know how I was going to survive these Chicago winters, because I grew up in Hawaii. But I do remember heading to the Push headquarters some Saturday mornings to listen and learn from Reverend Jackson. And y'all remember how on some mornings if there was a major issue going on, the room would be packed to the rafters. And sometimes some celebrity just wanders in. And then some mornings it was kind of low-key. Either way, though, the announcements would be made, and Reverend Barrow would say a prayer, and Jesse'd sit there, and then finally he'd gather himself up and stand, and he'd start kind of slow, you know. And sometimes he'd talk kind of low, so you couldn't quite catch what he was saying. So everybody lean in. And over time, it was that same boundless energy that would emerge, and that same passion and that same insight. And he'd offer you a master class in economics on a Saturday morning. And he'd give you a seminar in American history and American politics. And he'd make complicated things plain. And he'd tell stories that would make you laugh one minute and cry the next. And whether you were a bus driver or a teacher or a business leader or a young organizer, you came away from those meetings with a better understanding of how the world worked, how power worked. And more importantly, he made you believe that if we came together, we could make the world work better. Now, we've been talking about Jesse telling us we are somebody. I am somebody. And he wasn't just talking to young black boys like Isaiah, though he loved them fiercely. He wasn't just talking to young black girls to help them believe, though he believed in them. He was talking about everyone who was left out, everyone who was forgotten, everyone who was unseen, everyone who was unheard. And in that sense, he was expressing the very essence of what our democracy should be. The ideals at the very heart of the American experiment. The belief that regardless of what we look like or how we worship, regardless of where our ancestors come from or how much money we got, we're all part of the American family. We're all endowed with the same inalienable rights to life and liberty and the pursuit of happiness. We're all obligated to answer the call and step forward and take responsibility for making wrongs right and for caring for our neighbors and bringing the reality of America a step closer to its glorious ideals. And answering that call isn't always easy. And Reverend Jackson and his family knew that better than most. To do what he did, he would endure all kinds of hatred and setbacks and betrayals and doubters and death threats. he would sacrifice, as Jim Reynolds pointed out, the leisure and comfort of what was available to him as a far more financially secure life. And those sacrifices were not his alone. They were shared by his wife and his children. And they bore that burden with grace and strength. I got to know the Reverend and his family over the years, and as I watched his children follow his example of service, I came to appreciate the conviction that drove him and that he had passed on, the faith that guided him and that he had passed on. And it was a faith that didn't waver, a flame that burned bright, even as his body began to fail. The last time he and I had a chance to visit in person, he was already ailing. It was getting difficult for him to stand, difficult for him to speak. We were in Hyde Park, in a hotel room. I embraced him and figured we'd just have a low-key visit. Maybe he'd need some rest. And he starts coming up with this project and this initiative and issues I needed to look into. And here's some commentary that he would suggest, and some phrasing that he thought might work, and maybe we might co-write an article. And listening to him, I couldn't help smiling. Because it took me back. And I started reminiscing with him about those Saturday mornings at Push and the breakfast that he'd host, you know, away from the full meeting. And I didn't get a chance to go to that until I was a state senator, and probably Meeks invited me. So I was like, you know, I was tagging along with Meeks, and he'd pull out a piece of paper, you know, he'd scribbled some stuff, and he'd start passing out assignments and pulling together working groups and asking for updates on the latest campaign. And I'll admit, let's face it, those sessions could run a little long and did not always follow Robert's Rules of Order. But when Jesse called your name and acknowledged you in that room, especially if you were young, especially if you were just coming up, especially if you weren't sure you could pull off what you thought you might be able to do, especially when you needed help. When he did that, you stood up a little straighter. You knew you'd been seen by this giant. He'd laid hands on you and let you know you had a contribution to make. And so that day, I told him how much that meant to me and how much it meant to so many lives that he impacted. And I told him thank you, because I'd always be grateful for that legacy of hope. I know I've gone long. It was going to be much shorter until Isaiah spoke. I figure if a Detroit Piston can take up that much time, it was beautiful, and I mean that. Love me some Isaiah. We are living in a time when it can be hard to hope. Each day we wake up to some new assault on our democratic institutions. Another setback to the idea of the rule of law. An offense to common decency. Every day you wake up to things you just didn't think were possible. Each day we're told by those in high office to fear each other and to turn on each other, and that some Americans count more than others, and that some don't even count at all. Everywhere we see greed and bigotry being celebrated, and bullying and mockery masquerading as strength. We see science and expertise denigrated, while ignorance and dishonesty and cruelty and corruption are reaping untold rewards. Every single day we see that, and it's hard to hope in those moments. So it may be tempting to get discouraged, to give in to cynicism. It may be tempting for some to compromise with power and grab what you can, or even for good people to maybe just put your head down and wait for the storm to pass. But this man, Reverend Jesse Lewis Jackson, inspires us to take a harder path. His voice calls on each of us to be heralds of change, to be messengers of hope, to step forward and say, send me. Wherever we have a chance to make an impact, whether it's in our school, or our workplaces, or our neighborhoods, or our cities. Not for fame, not for glory, or because success is guaranteed, but because it gives our life purpose. Because it aligns with what our faith tells us God demands. And because if we don't step up, no one else will. How fortunate we were that Jesse Jackson answered that call. What a great debt we owe to him. May God bless Reverend Jackson. May he rest in eternal peace.
Ladies and gentlemen, the 46th President of the United States, please welcome President Joseph Biden.
Thank you. I think that clock is broken. I'll try to keep this under 2 minutes. The Jackson family, I know we're celebrating a life. Was a life lost? Having lost a wife and a daughter and a son, it's called out of the blue. It's not easy. No matter how much you loved them, no matter how close you were. So I just like to express my deep sense of, how can I say it, sympathy and understanding. But the big thing is God left. He left you something that no one else could. He left you character, judgment, honesty. You can't kid yourselves about what's right and wrong. President Obama, President Mrs. Clinton, Vice President Harris. Jesse believed, the Bible tells us, that they that wait upon the Lord shall renew their strength. They shall mount up with wings as eagles. They shall run and not be weary. They shall walk and not grow faint. I hope the hell you all got that, but you're going to need help getting out of here. You know, I come from Scranton, Pennsylvania initially, where the fact that I was an Irish Catholic wasn't a very positive thing to be. And then moved down to Wilmington, Delaware, which was segregated by law, and remained that way for much of my life. And, you know, it's interesting that Jesse Jackson, before we knew Jesse Jackson, I was raised with the notion that that hope was all you really have. You can't give up hope. My dad used to say, when you get knocked down, Joey, just get up. Just get up. Well, I was a kid. I was a relatively good athlete, a pretty good student, but I stuttered to talk like that. Now, if I told you all earlier, when I was a kid, I had a cleft palate or a club foot, none of you would have laughed. But it's okay to laugh at stuttering. I'm not being critical of you, but think about it. It's the one place where people think you're stupid. Oh, really? I'm a hell of a lot smarter than most of you. But all kidding aside, it makes you feel really small. Makes you feel really small. And you know, when I moved from Wilmington to Claymont, Delaware, a working-class town, I was surprised. I remember being dropped off at the little Catholic school I went to, 3rd grade. And I watched this bus go by every day. And it passed, I was on the call of Philadelphia Pike connecting Wilmington and Philadelphia. And it passed the turn to the big high school, Claymont High School. And the little Catholic school I went to, Holy Rosary, was right on the corner. I remember saying to my mom, "Mom, why does that happen?" She said, "Well, black kids aren't allowed to go to school with white kids in Delaware." And, you know, the more I thought about that, I thought to myself, how can that be, how can that work? How can that be right? And so, as strange as it sounds, I got involved in being concerned about it. I didn't know a damn thing about the civil rights movement. I was going into 4th grade. But you know what's right and you know what's wrong and you feel it. You know, the fact of the matter is, the man of God and the people throughout the decade of friendship and partnership, I knew Jesse. We were both young. I'm only 83. Here's it. I'll tell you laughing at it. It's 40 times 2 plus. But all kidding aside, we came up through the same time. I knew Jesse, and history remembers him. I knew him as determined and tenacious. I knew him as underrated, undeterred, and unafraid. Not a joke. And more than most, Jesse was dedicated with every fiber in his being to redeeming the soul of America. The soul of America. You know, Jesse and I came up together as leaders in the Democratic Party. We had very different backgrounds, and in some cases even different views, but never on race. Sometimes we went at it toe-to-toe. We disagreed on some issues. But that's what I actually admired most about Jesse, his passion. He was passionate. His passion, the courage of his convictions. And you know, his courage inspired a hell of a lot of us, even though we were the same age. You know, with his captivating presence, his stirring words, he would be easy for history to mistake Jesse for a firebrand. I think they'd get it wrong. Jesse certainly created his fair share of good trouble. But through decades of service, Jesse's abiding message was one of unity. That's what he talked about. Through decades of service, Jesse's abiding message of unity moved people in the right direction. Above all, he always sought common ground. I remember telling Jesse that I knew a guy in South Africa that I was going to go see. His name is Nelson Mandela. And Jesse saying, how are you going to guys actually see him? By the way, you know, the continent of Africa is going to be the largest continent in the world in terms of population by the year 2050. The largest in the entire world. Watch, man. Watch. And the fact of the matter was that I remember there were a group of senators going down to, I got elected when I was 29. I wasn't old enough to be sworn in. For real. Some people I wasn't bright enough to be sworn in. But the point was, I had to wait 17 days before I could be eligible to be sworn in as the United States Senator. One of the benefits that had was I wasn't going to leave the Senate. I wasn't going to be sworn in because I got a phone call on December 18th before we would get sworn in January that my wife and daughter had just been killed and my 2 boys were going to die. So I decided what I was going to do. There was an accident. There was a Christmas shop, a tractor trailer hit them. So I decided I wasn't going to go to the Senate. And often pointed out to me, I said, you know, my kids can, the state of Delaware can always get another senator. We had a Democratic governor. And, but they can't, my kids can't get another father. But because of a couple of people, starting with Teddy Kennedy and a guy named Fritz Hollins from South Carolina, where Jesse is from, and a few others after Hubert Humphrey and others, they put their arm around me and they said, look, just stay for 10 months and then go. Because they knew I was going to be leaving, as Hillary can tell you, and all 3 of you can tell you, is that when you're a freshman, you don't get on the good committees. Committees everybody wants to get on are Appropriations, Finance, Judiciary, and Foreign Relations. So to keep me down there, they put me on 2 really important committees. The Judiciary Committee, which allowed me to appoint the first black justice to the Supreme Court. And the Foreign Relations Committee. The real benefit of that was, I've been around so damn long, I literally, and I'm not being critical of my colleagues, I know more heads of state personally than any other president in the history of the United States of America. Which means I know a lot about other countries. I spend a lot of time. But here's the point. You know, the fact is that as I learned, and by the way, I've forgotten more about what Putin does and these guys and Xi than most people know. I've met with Putin anyway. And remember, Barack was a great, great man to be vice president for. I really mean it, Barack. Thank you. Barack and I had a deal where we talk with each other every morning we'd be the first 2 people we talk to. And every night we'd be the last 2 people we talk to. And Barack would be asking me a question or something. I'd say, well, you know, it's all personal relations. You go, I know, Joe. Enough about all personal relations. But the fact of the matter is, that's why he was such a damn good president. And the whole point of what I'm trying to get at here is that, you know, Jesse did it really well. You got to know people. You got to understand what's on their mind. You got to kind of speak to them. You got to be able to talk to them. And above all, Jesse always sought common ground. Of course, he preached hope because, folks, despite all he endured growing up, despite the pain and disappointment he experienced, Jesse was an optimist at his core. No matter what you say, at his core, he was an optimist. I don't know if it was born out of religious beliefs. I don't know if it was born out of how it arrived, but it arrived in people in different ways. But it mattered a lot. It mattered a lot. He kept the faith with the American people. Every time I moved away after I moved from Scranton, we'd go up there and spend the summers up there. Every time I leave my grandpa Ambrose Finnegan's home, he was an All-American football player at Santa Clara when Irish Catholics weren't very much in vogue and kept in the mines up there, as Hillary knows that state well. And every time I leave the house, he yelled, "Joey, keep the faith." And my grandmother will know, "Joey, spread it." Well, folks, I had the opportunity to come up in politics at a time with people like Jesse around, and Jesse in particular, where he talked about hope. He talked about hope. He believed in his bones in the promise of America. We're all created equal in the image of God. And we hear this all the time. So I wonder how many people really believe it. He believed everybody deserved to be treated with equally and throughout their lives. And while we've never fully lived up to the promise, I don't think things would have been the same had Jesse not been around, because Jesse decided that his life was ensuring that we never fully walk away from it either. Because there's bad times like now. We're in a tough spot, folks. We got an administration that doesn't share any of the values that we have. And I don't think I'm exaggerating a little bit. So, he knew who we were at our best, and he simply refused to let us off the hook as a party, as a nation, or as individuals. And time and again, through triumph and turmoil, with relentless insistence on what is right and just, he helped lead us closer to fulfilling our nation's promise of restoring the nation's soul. He used his gifts to influence generations of Americans, and countless elected officials, including presidents, as you see here today. And though through his impassioned words on the campaign trail and through moments of quiet courage, Jesse changed history in ways numerous and profound. In fact, I want to thank the Jackson family again, because you don't do it without family. My dad used to have an expression, Miss Jackson. He said, family is the beginning, the middle, and the end. It's all family. And Rainbow Push Coalition, you know, the family, you're just incredible. But I promise you, as much as we're celebrating here, when you leave here, you're still going to go home and you're going to feel a little hole in your heart. He's gone. He's gone. But only I can tell you from experience of losing so many people in my family, the day will come when his memory brings a smile to your lips before it brings a tear to your eye. It will come. It will come. And my prayer for you will be sooner than later. Look, you know, at the Legion of Americans, I know there are many who counted Jesse as a mentor, a friend, a hero. Let us be what Jesse called us to be. A margin of hope. Sometimes just a margin. You change people's lives, you change community lives. Lift up this country and light the path to a nation Jesse always believed we could be. You know, 3 years ago this week, Jesse and I came together once again on the Edmund Pettus Bridge. Walk across that bridge. When you stand there, you come from a state like Delaware, you understand what's on the other side when they're waiting there. Thugs on horses waiting to beat the living hell out of you. Well, let me tell you something. We reenacted that a number of times. But this time, Jesse's in a wheelchair. But he's not deterred. His faith renewed his strength. And with faith, he didn't grow weary and didn't let us grow weary. No, he really didn't. I know it sounds strange, but he didn't. I reflected on Jesse's strength and his spirit. Let me close with sharing a hymn that means a lot to the Biden family. Particularly meant a lot to my son, Bo. Bo is a wonderful guy. He should be standing here, not me. Bo was the Attorney General of the state of Delaware, a really decent guy, loved by everyone in the community. Volunteered to go to Iraq rather than go to Iraq when it was all National Guard. And he died there because he was exposed to those burn pits. Well, you know, this quote meant a lot. And he will raise you up on eagle's wings and bear you on the breath of dawn. And let this light shine upon you like the sun until next time he sees you, he'll be holding in the palm of his hand. My prayer for everyone here, and I'm cutting my speech very short because I'm afraid I'm going to be attacked. So, folks, I guess I could say it all in one paragraph. Don't give up. I started off every morning as a young man when I got back to Delaware. Every morning, because I got involved in my community, I quit my job with one of the biggest law firms in Delaware, became a public defender. And I spent a lot of time with the community. I was the only white guy who worked on the east side of Wilmington, Delaware. Matter of fact, they named the biggest swimming pool after me, the Biden swimming pool, man. But all kidding aside, I was one of only 13 lifeguards. I was the only white guy. Because I wanted to understand. I thought I knew the issues, but didn't understand the individual persons. I remember I had a little Chevette. I remember an all-state halfback I played with. And he said, "Joe, you have a jerry can? You know, a big 5-gallon. He said, "Can I borrow your car?" I said, "You got a car? Sure, you can borrow. What do you need a jerry can for?" He said, "You dumb SOB. I'm going down to see my mother in North Carolina. I can't stop at a gas station. I can't stop at the gas station." The point I'm making is, the more we know one another, the more we understand what we're going through. There's enough decency and human nature in this country to reach out, to help. You know, Jesse kept hope alive for us in his lifetime. And we've got to continue to do it in our lifetime for our children, because there's nothing beyond our capacity when we work together. Nothing, nothing, nothing. So stand up and finish this job.
Thank you. I've heard all through our service, first giving honor and regard to the Jackson family and to the matriarch of liberation, Mrs. Jacqueline Lavinia Jackson. As I listened and thought about, everyone quoted the slogan of Reverend Jackson, but I want to, in my few minutes, and if you take Brother Biden's minutes and other minutes, I come out of the Jackson School of Thought. They told me 4 minutes, which means 8 in Jacksonian language. I don't want us, Yusef, to leave here having mourned and then mock what Jackson was all about. We're sitting here acting like our own lack of rising to what he wanted us to be is the reason we are sitting on the brink of some of the most serious Reconstruction behavior being rescinded that we've seen in modern times. To leave here and not follow an assignment would not be what Jesse Jackson taught us. To make us feel good, we went to Jesse Jackson's funeral, and that we said nice things about Mrs. Jackson, but people at the same time are killing illegal immigrants. People at the same time are cutting public funding. At the same time, Affordable Care Act is not being renewed and seniors have to deal with premiums. Don't sit here so holy and sanctified and act like you have no assignment yourself. Jesse and Jacqueline Jackson did theirs. Do you realize they were born, he in South Carolina, her in Florida, when it was against the law? I'm not talking about a custom. It's against the law to ride in certain buses. Against the law to use a toilet downtown. Against the law for you to eat in certain restaurants. And these two Southern-born, raised in Southern American apartheid, went on and put two of their sons in Congress, broke down barriers of voting. They did theirs. They planted a platform that led to an empowerment, and we are the generations behind them that have returned to those that were against us being empowered. Oh, they went against the Southern bigots in the overalls. We're dealing with manicured Fifth Avenue bigots. I remember I was 12 years old. I was a boy preacher in the Church of God in Christ. Bishop Sheard knew my bishop, Bishop Washington. Bishop Washington, my mother was concerned I was getting into politics. They brought us to Reverend William Jones. His daughter's traveling with us. And Reverend Jones introduced me to Jesse Jackson. I became his youth director in New York at 13. I liked Reverend Jackson because he was a little hipper than the older preachers. He was 27, I was 13 by the time I became youth director. So he was like a father figure to me. When I got about 40, he said, quit calling me father, call me big brother. But what I liked about it is that he didn't have the background others had. He didn't come from generations of preachers. So those of us that didn't have that pedigree, didn't have that background, could relate. And he talked about economics, and he talked about discipline. He would not let us make excuses. I would call him and say we're doing certain things and they're attacking us in the press. He said, oh, another pity party. He never cared when we felt we were being unfairly attacked. But I never will forget 1994. We went to Dakar, Senegal, and James Meeks and Jesse Jr. and I had dinner with him that night. And that's where he said, Al, Meeks, Jesse Jr., y'all are my disciples. And we said, disciples? And for years, we joked each other. I'd come in the room and Junior say, here's disciple number one, and Meeks. But discipleship meant you carried forth the vision. The next day, he took me on the ferry to Goree Island, Mrs. Jackson, and on Goree Island, he showed me where the slave camps were. And I will never forget, he said, "Al, you see what that artifact is?" I said, "What's that?" He said, "They call it the door of no return. When you go through that door, you either made it to America to slavery or you died in the Atlantic. The door of no return." But I talked to him about 3 years ago, and I reminded him, I said, "You remember when you brought me to the door of no return?" He said, "Yeah." I said, "Well, we did return. We returned the President of the United States, Barack Obama. We returned the Vice President, Kamala Harris. We returned with businessmen. They thought they sent us as slaves. We came back as global liberators. The problem is that too many of us did not join the movements that sponsored us. And there was a breakout in 2024 called Negro Amnesia, where you forgot where you came from and forgot how you got where you got. Therefore, they're trying to take back everything you have. I asked Michael Eric Dyson, our prominent scholar, "Where in history is this?" He said, "We always go one step forward and two backward." Well, here we are now. The problem is not Trump. The problem is us. We are allowing ourselves to be lowered and our children to feel inferior because you don't have an "I am somebody" person. You got our artists calling our women bees. Our others calling us niggas. What happened to us? What happened to black and proud? What happened? I'm gonna vote. What happened? Ain't gonna let nobody turn me around. What happened to us? We believed our way, and we had the faith to do it. And that's why my challenge to you is that we should do what Jesse Jackson did. Not look at what you can see, but look at what you can believe even if you can't see it. Sitting up here talking about, "Oh, they got all the power, we can't win." We gotta win. Because they put the seeds of victory in us. If we just nurture them and grow, Hakeem Jeffries be the Speaker of the House. If we keep on winning, we'll get the Senate back. If we keep winning, we can save health care for our grandmamas. If we keep winning, we can bring about criminal justice reform. If we keep winning, we can have 2 Jackson boys in the Congress. We didn't come this far to turn around now. Reverend Sharp, pastor fellowship, I was talking to him. And I said, "Reverend Sharp, I was saying, Reverend Sharp, Jesse Jackson talked about keep hope alive. And I met a man that Reverend Jackson admired called Adam Clayton Powell when I was a kid. And Adam had a slogan called Keep the Faith, Baby. And I'd like, Tyler Perry's here. He canceled something to be with us. I'd like one day Tyler to do a whole thing on it, Adam Powell, because there's a little risque side to Adam that Tyler know how to handle that kind of stuff. And between Jesse Jackson's slogan of keep hope and Adam's slogan of keep faith is what I challenge us and the Jackson family to do. Because my mother told me in my engine, I had 2 gears, hope and fear. Hope is that I hope a better day will come. Hope is I won't give up. Hope is that we come this far by faith. But she said, but sometimes it's going to get dreary. And that's when your gear goes to faith. Faith is the substance of things you hoped for, not hoped for. The evidence of things not seen. Faith is when the doctors give up, but you hold on for another doctor. Faith is when you got bills to pay and no money to pay them. Faith is when they write you off and when they write you back. We come this far by faith, leaning on the Lord. Or they getting ready to celebrate the 250th anniversary of the country, but we were not free in 1776. It is not our celebration. We got here in 1619. We worked 246 years and never got paid, but we are still here. We come this far by faith. It was against the law to read and write. It was against the law to marry, but we come this far by faith. I don't care what they do in Washington. I care what we do in the community. We beat people bigger than Trump. We fought people harder than them if we stand up and be what we're supposed to be. Private sector saying they're going to end diversity, equity, and inclusion. Sharp. We started Wall Street. Wall Street.
We did that.
Dealing with diversity.
We did that.
So you don't want a diversity in your boardroom? Then don't have a diversified consumer base. So what I'm urging you to do is leave here with some Jackson fire in you. Not just a program book, but to say I see the things the way they are, but I'm going to turn and change them. Have some Jackie Jackson fire saying I'm going to raise my kids beyond your expectation. I'm going to rise up anyhow. But Reverend, it looks bad now. Look at Iran. Look at what's going on in Minnesota. Look on. Yeah, but I was raised by them to realize that after storms, if we do the right thing in the storm, if we organize, if we register, if we do what we're supposed to do, there's always a rainbow coming out. The rainbow don't show until the storm is over. The rainbow gonna come out in November. The rainbow gonna come out in 28. We're gonna fix these tricks in 26 and march through the gates in 28. We didn't come this far to turn around now. We won't go back. We won't go back. We won't go back.
Whoa. I'm actually going to be pretty close on time. I think we should not forget, and Jim Zogby didn't, he did a fine job, but this is a celebration and a memorial service. And you have to ask yourself, what did Jesse Jackson do that I admire most, that moved me most, and what can I do right now that would maybe be as good as what he did then? That's what we're all facing here. I love Jackie and her family. Santita sang at my second inauguration. The boys have got to go to Congress, and Yusuf, I thought when the first time I met Yusuf, I thought, I can do whatever I wanted if he worked for me. He'd just take care of things. And you're good at it. It's been an honor to know all of you. But I want to say something, highly personal tonight. I came to truly love Jesse Jackson. And we had more in common than he thought. We were both two guys who were born to single mothers living in the South. And so I got to watch this guy, and frankly, the first time we met was at the 20th anniversary of the celebration of the integration of Little Rock Central High School. And some young people may not even know why that's important. But in the 1920s, that school was voted the most beautiful high school in America. During the whole time I was governor of Arkansas, that one school accounted for 25% of our merit scholars. You could go there and study Latin and Greek, which was a pretty big deal out in the country, in addition to all the science and math. So they were celebrating the 20th anniversary, and Jesse showed up to help them. But he was always asking himself, what can we use the observation of a past victory for to get something done today? So by the late 70s, all these medium-sized and little towns in the middle of the country were being flooded with drugs. All these folks were facing more vigorous law enforcement on the coast, but they were coming in. And I kept thinking, I know Jesse Jackson's going to know this, and he's going to say something. And I just want to be there. And I was a 29-year-old attorney general. And Hillary, a Chicago girl, was she was practicing law and supporting us because the salary was almost non-existent. So Jesse gets up in front of this crowd of kids, and their eyes were big as dollars. And he said, you owe a lot to the Little Rock Nine who integrated this school. You owe a lot to Daisy Bates and the other people who supported them. You owe a lot to the people who were there long before them. You cannot take this achievement and throw it away on drugs. And then he said, I'll never forget it. And I thought, where are all the conservatives when you need them to cheer? Jesse Jackson looked at these kids and he said, you have to open your brains, not your veins. And I thought to myself, no matter how long I live and stay in politics, I may never have a single line that's that good. I mean, think about it. It's totally brilliant. It captures personal responsibility and caring and self-survival. All these pastors here who've done such a great job on this, I know you spend endless hours when you're putting your sermons together and you're running your programs in your churches and things. What can we do that will work? And whenever I get discouraged, I think about Jesse and I just laugh. Well, you got to open your brains and not your veins. So 10 years later, I was living in the governor's mansion. And Jesse shows up for the 30th anniversary of the integration of Little Rock Central High School. By then I become governor, and we bring all of them back to the governor's mansion because that's where Governor Faubus plotted to disenfranchise them and keep black people out of school. So we had a big dinner that night. And after the dinner was over, Hillary asked Jesse to hang around so we could talk. We went to the kitchen, put some more food on the counter, and talked till midnight. And Hillary said, you know, we all got to work tomorrow. I'm going to bed. 2 hours later, Jesse and I are still going about it. And she walks into the kitchen and throws us out. I'll never forget it. We did not always agree, but I'll tell you one thing. He made me a better president when I got in office. Because he was always pushing on things. And he knew that change came from the outside in and sometimes from the inside out. So he knew how to keep pushing and nagging and wearing you out. Right? Look at Governor Pritzker laughing here. I mean, it was like having a dog to the bone, you know. He was, I said one time when he was working on something in Africa, because I made him a special envoy for African diplomacy, I said, you know, we ought to put Jesse on the list. And one of my said, only members of Congress are on that list. I know, but I said, I think we need to put him on anyway. And they said, so I had another guy who was there and said, what the list is? He said, it's a list of people that'll dog you to death until you do what they want you to do. So we just call it the Just Say Yes list. Put it on the Just Say Yes. It saves you so much time, and you can go on and do something else with your day. And I remember how impressed I was in 1988, before I became president, when Jesse and negotiated with Governor Dukakis and the other people at the Democratic Convention to end the exclusive primaries, which you talked about, and the caucuses, and to open up the democratic process and add people, including Willie Barrow and Representative Maxine Waters, who became one of our senior leaders. I'm saying this to make another point. Everybody knows how eloquent he was, and everybody knows that he could talk an owl out of a tree. But he actually was interested in policy, in specifics. So that's the second thing I'd like to say. So what if you weren't big, tall, broad-shouldered, and eloquent like Jesse Jackson? If you want to make change, there's still plenty you could do if you've got an agenda. You've got to have it. He always had an agenda. So, that's the most important thing I could say to you. Now, one other thing I am going to say. Wordsworth, you don't think about Wordsworth when you think about Jesse. But Wordsworth said the last best hope of a good man's life for the little unremembered acts of kindness and love. So I used to think all the time about how hard Jesse's childhood must have been, you know, with his mother and then having to go past his father's house and all that, and all the mixed up. And I knew a little about not nearly as severe a situation because of my situation. And I admired his mother. I was afraid of Jackie. I'd do whatever she said. But I love you so much. But I really I liked his mother. And he called me one day, and he said, this is purely personal, but my mother liked you, you know, and I'd really appreciate it if you would speak at her service. And he said, Andy Young's coming, and you know there aren't that many of us left anymore who are over 75 and have been through all this. And I said I would be honored. I know this sounds funny, but it really meant something to me that he wanted me to talk at his mother's memorial service. And then I don't think I've ever told anybody this. When the Congress was trying to run me out, and I was in that big impeachment fight, Jesse called me one night in the White House. I thought he was calling me. He said, I don't want to talk to you. I want you to go get Chelsea. Now keep in mind, he's got all this other stuff going on. We got all this stuff. He called me to talk to my daughter to make sure she had her head in the game. And he prayed with her on the phone. And, you know, a lot of people, it would never even have occurred to them to do that. And ever since Hillary and I went to visit Jesse in the hospital, and Jackie and a lot of the family were there, I've been thinking about him, calling my daughter. He didn't know if I was going to be president in 6 months. He didn't know what was going to happen. But he liked Chelsea. I thought Shody had good taste. But my point is, those are the things you remember. So I think we should honor him by saying, okay, maybe I'll never come up with a line like, open your brains and not your veins. Maybe I'll never give a speech that will move hundreds of thousands, but I can do something. I can still be somebody. And what should I do? And how can I, with whatever speaking ability I have or don't have, do what he did when he calls Bill Clinton's daughter in a crisis? When he asked a friend, I know you may be busy and my mother's not famous, but would you please come say a few words? And Andy Young and I went, we both went, and we were there. So that's what I want all of you to think about when you leave here. This guy lived a big life. He lived with his head and with his heart. He was faithful to the scripture which said, we have all sinned and fallen short of the glory of God. But unlike a lot of people in politics, he didn't go around looking down his nose at other people. He hated the sin and not the sinner. He was always trying to lift people up. So I'm here more as a friend than a former president. He was my friend when I needed him. And I ask you to ask yourselves how you can do more by being a better friend and a more effective one. God bless you and thank you.
Good afternoon, everyone. Mrs. Jackie, and to the entire Jackson family, on behalf of Doug and my family, we pray with you as we did a couple weeks ago in your home, and we thank you. I thank you. So let me just say, I predicted a lot about what's happening right now. I'm not into saying I told you so, but we did see it coming. But what I did not predict is that we would not have Jesse Jackson with us right now to help us get through this. And this afternoon has been such a beautiful remembrance of his spirit, his life, and his faith. And in a way that Reverend Al talked about it and so many others have, I do think of this afternoon as what it is doing for me to renew my faith in what is possible, fueled by the hope that Jesse Jackson so often reminded us of. I'm reminded of a passage in the Gospel of Matthew, chapter 7, verse 7. Ask, and it will be given to you. Seek, and you will find. Knock, and the door will be opened to you. And so from a young age, we know that Reverend Jackson saw that the doors had been closed to the millions of people across our nation and throughout the world who were otherwise so deserving. And they were doors, of course, to opportunity, to equity, to justice, to freedom. And so he dedicated his life, as we all know, to breaking down those barriers. So when we are speaking of these doors, I will share with you that as a child, I was raised that when you see a closed door, you must knock and wait to be invited in. What life has taught me is that if that invitation is not offered, and if that door remains shut, even after repeated attempts to knock on said door, sometimes you have no choice but just to kick that door open. Reverend Jackson was impatient. He did not waste time waiting. Even when the doors in front of him were barred and bolted, even if those on the other side hesitated or even ignored him, he always devised a way through. Jesse Jackson was a strategist. He was one of the most effective community and political organizers of our time. And he was the founder, I think most would agree, the founder of the Modern Progressive Coalition. Think about the work that he did. In addition to the strength of his spirit and his determination, the leadership of Jesse Jackson was defined by his vision, dare I say his ambition, to tap into what otherwise had been untapped in terms of the potential of a coalition of seemingly different people who could be brought together around shared values and ideals and experience. That's what Jesse Jackson did. He modeled that for so many of us. Over The past half century, that coalition strategy, his methodology, has been the heartbeat for so many movements about progress in our country. Those movements born out of struggle, but resulting in progress. Think about, and it was mentioned, the women leaders that he elevated, like the self-described colored girls, who have been a driving force behind so many campaigns that have been about freedom and justice. Throughout his life, Reverend Jackson reminded us that the many fights for freedom are interconnected. He saw not only the interconnection, but the interdependence of the various struggles for justice and dignity on behalf of Black Americans, Native and Asian Americans, Latino, LGBTQ Americans, and Americans with disabilities. That was Jesse's rainbow, and he continued to grow it. He gave us the language, the rainbow, to understand, as has been said, the beauty that comes after the storm, when we see what is possible and what can be unburdened by what has been. As he once said, when a barrier falls for one of the locked out, it opens the doors for all. And that is what he told me, and what he taught me, and how he inspired me. I was a student at Howard University, you know, when Jesse Jackson was one of the leaders of the anti-apartheid movement, and me and my classmates would go out on the mall every weekend and protest, looking at Jesse Jackson as a model of what that movement should and could have been. I was a law student then in 1988 when Jesse Jackson decided to run again. I was the first Black woman elected district attorney of San Francisco. I was the first Black woman elected district attorney in the state of California in 2004, when I created one of the first in the nation initiatives as a prosecutor that was about getting jobs and counseling to those who had been in the criminal justice system. And at the time, the powers that be told me I was not supposed to be doing that. They said, why are you letting people out of jail when you're supposed to put them back in? Jesse Jackson spent a lot of time in the Bay Area, many of you may know. I saw Butch Wing here. And Butch, together with Jesse Jackson, would visit with me during those earliest days of my elected career to give me the support and the confidence and the initiative to think about how, in a position such as being DA, I could continue the idea about what it means to build coalition around a group of people whose dignity must be seen and the resources that must be put into them. Jesse Jackson, from my first elected position to when I ran with Joe Biden for Vice President of the United States, and when I became the Democratic nominee for President of the United States, always told me and convinced me that everything that we were doing is possible. And so I just want to share what I brought today. I brought with me two momentums from Jesse Jackson's campaign that I have saved since I was a student. So one is this button that reads Jesse Jackson 88. The other, some of you who were around at the time may remember, is this button. I will read it to you, and pastors, please forgive me. It reads as follows, all caps. Damn straight, exclamation point. It's time for a Black presidential candidate. That was a Jesse Jackson pin from those days. And just a beautiful example of his determination, his sense of humor, but his ability to see what can be unburdened by what has been. And I thank you, Jesse Jackson, for your service, to our nation and the world. Well done, good and faithful servant. Well done. Thank you.
Thank you, Pastor Meeks. If I can have everyone's attention for just a moment, I promise that I'm going to bring this program to a tighter close and get us out of here at a reasonable hour. Abraham Lincoln delivered the Gettysburg Address, Pastor Browning, in 3.5 minutes. Martin Luther King Jr. delivered the I Have a Dream speech in 13.5 minutes. If it can't be said between the Gettysburg Address and I Have a Dream, it ought not be said at all. For what remains of my time, and I promise Yusef that I would not be more than 7 or 8 minutes, I want to talk about my daddy. Now, when Martin Luther King Jr. died in 1968, he was an immensely unpopular figure. Brother Reynolds, Brother Sharpton, members of the Congressional Black Caucus who were present. Dr. King on April 4th, 1968 was immensely unpopular. Who he is today is not who he was on April 4th, 1968. And I'm sensing, Sister Parker, on this occasion that we are moving in the direction of a Jesse Jackson that I wouldn't, Mama, even recognize. Or in the Gaza. He would have been fighting for the Affordable Care Act. He would be fighting to save the Voting Rights Act of 1965 and challenging the Supreme Court to render a decision in the Calais decision that would strengthen the Congressional Black Caucus and not undermine it. If you are a member of the Congressional Black Caucus and you are still here, allow us the opportunity to recognize you. Will you please stand? Members of the CBC came from around the country, and our congressional districts are under threat at this hour. I want to try and summarize in the 5 minutes that I have left some of what I heard from everyone, starting with President Clinton. He said, with head and heart. With Head and Heart is the title of the autobiography written by the late Dr. Howard Thurman, who dedicates his life story to simple and haunting simplicity, Mr. Mayor. He dedicates the book, and I quote this, Jonathan, to the stranger in the railroad station in Daytona Beach who restored my broken dream 65 years ago. To the stranger. Who was Jesse Jackson? To the political class that took up most of the time. Dad was a stranger, awaiting a return phone call, reminding the political class of the urgency of the hour. That's who my daddy was. To the economic class that Jim Reynolds talked about on Wall Street. My father had no qualifications in business or in finance to be able to talk intelligently initially about the transactions of Wall Street, but to them, he was the stranger. So this story comes together in Howard Thurman's book with my final 4 minutes in this way, Brother Turner. It says that Howard Thurman's sharecropping family had been gathering in the Deep South all of the coins of their hard work, and they had put just enough money together to send Howard Thurman to college by buying him a train ticket. And when he got to the train station, after having loaded all of the broken pieces, Pastor Dates, into his life and of his life into a trunk, the conductor of the train told him, Judge Mathis, that he could not carry the trunk on the train unless he bought another ticket. And so Howard Thurman went over in the corner of the train station and he began crying for the idea that after all that his family had been through, he would not, mama, be going to college. And as he cried through those tears, he looked up and saw a pair of brown, old, rustic boots. And then he looked up and he saw a man in overalls. And he looked up and he saw a black man. And the black man said to him, "Son, why are you crying, boy?" And Howard Thurman said, "Because the broken pieces of my life I cannot take with me to college because I need a ticket." And the old man, Sister Bryant and Reverend Bryant, reached into his pocket and pulled out a little leather sack and took some coins and went and bought Howard Thurman a ticket for his luggage. And Howard Thurman says in the story that all he remembers is the man walking down the train tracks while he and the train were heading in the opposite direction. Pastor Muncie, he dedicates his book to the stranger who changed the trajectory of his life by restoring his hope. Every single person in here has a Jesse Jackson story. The time he shook your hand, the time he prayed for you, the time he held you up, the time he prayed the funeral for somebody that you know, the time he was at the hospital for you, the time, Roland, when you lost your job and he prayed you to a new course of existence. Everybody has, Sister Waters, their own Jesse Jackson story. Why? Because according to Dr. Walter Fluker, the infinite Howard Thurman scholar, he says to Howard Thurman, the stranger, watch this, preachers, the stranger was God. Two minutes. The stranger was God because he redeemed and restored the hope of Howard Thurman, a man whose name he did not know, and he sent him to college. At the moment that he needed hope, hope showed up in the form of a stranger. It's impossible, Roland Burris, for one man to know all of the people that Jesse Jackson has touched. Everybody here doesn't have the number. He don't need it no more. 773-251-6353. But just about everybody in here had the number 773-251-6353. It's a flip phone. It's analog. He didn't believe in iPhones and Samsung. He believed in a flip phone. Because whenever we needed Isaiah the stranger, that's what I heard you say, when the stranger showed up in the locker room, when the stranger showed up in them projects, when the stranger showed up, the stranger came in the form and in the embodiment of Jesse Jackson. Because he is the one, Reverend Sharpton, who we came into contact with, who restored our hope and changed the trajectory of our lives. No, I'm going to go on ahead tomorrow morning and push. 930 East 50th Street, part 2 of this will be there, because I got enough sense to know that I've already talked too long. I want you to think about the stranger, Reverend Dyson, in your life. It's going to be a nameless, faceless person who enters your life and restores your hope. And so when Jesse Jackson said, I don't care what the political class says, they're only interested in high propensity voters. My father looked at the undecided, Father Flager, and he recognized that they lacked somebodyness. And he told them to keep hope alive. But that's not enough. Keeping hope alive is the answer to suicidality. Not only for individuals who might want to kill themselves, but for a nation on the brink of self-destruction. Keep hope alive. For a man or a woman getting ready to hang themselves who's given up on hope, Bishop Ellis, Reverend Jackson says, they need hope, not dope. Kevin Adele, he took the ministry from Sunday morning and he delivered it to the people. I am somebodyness is what Jesse Jackson's known for. Not the 84 and 88 campaign and just voter registration. Jesse Jackson's greatest contribution is not political. It is psychological. Negro, you are better off today than you were when you met this Negro.